Hello, this is Sean with Breaking Culture, and today I'm bringing you the next installment in our Media and Cultural Theories case study series. The purpose of this series, as last time, is to dig into a particular case study using a key media and cultural theory. The point of this is always to both use the theory to better understand the object you're looking at and to evaluate how useful this theory is based on what it helps explain about the object. So today we'll be talking about semiotics, and in the next few videos, I'll be discussing the method of semiotics and the theory of myth as elaborated by the French theorist Roland Barthes. I will look at a variety of objects to illustrate how these ideas work, especially the analytic distinction between denotation and connotation. And this will include some of the images from the case study last week, that of 9/11, which provides a multitude of examples to explore using Barth's theory in myth today. But before we can consider Barth, we have to understand some of the basic concepts of semiotics. And to do this, I'll pick up on a case study I recently wrote about on my Substack, which is Breaking Culture at Substack.com. The meme announcing the military occupation of Chicago earlier this month. It's worth noting that this meme is one of the only precipitates of the supposed war on Chicago. After a massive set of protests and statements from our governor, mayor, and many other political leaders, the Trump administration decided not to send the National Guard. I'm here in Chicago, and ICE is definitely increasing its presence, but there was no military occupation as in Los Angeles or DC. So these semiotic artifacts serve to both announce, promote, and justify potential authoritarian actions, and in the end, to be the only part of those actions to ever actually materialize. So, picking up on our last video on encoding and decoding, we could say that semiotics is a field that looks at some of the raw materials of the encoding process. The idea of semiotics is based in part on the linguistic theory of Ferdinand de Saussure, who was a Swiss theorist living in the late 19th century. The main question that Saussure felt we needed to contemplate in order to understand linguistics was the question of how, when members of the same linguistic community say a word, they can be somewhat assured that the other members of the same community will understand the concept related to that word. He broke down these parts into the signifier, which is the thing signifying, the signified, the concept being signified, and the sign, which is the relationship between them. Saussure said this process of understanding how a particular word or all signifiers work to transmit particular signifieds uh, could be productively expanded to include other kinds of sign relationships, allowing us to develop a more generalized science of signs or semiotics. Just to reiterate, though we often talk about signs as if they're almost mathematical equations, Saussure wants us to understand that the sign is always a relationship. The signification process that places signifiers like the sound pattern or word tree in relationship with signifieds, the idea or concept of the tree, is not automatic or natural. There's no treeness in the word tree that makes the relationship between the signifier and the signified necessary. We could just as easily name the concept that we associate with the word tree something else entirely. And this is a fact made clear by noticing the way that a single signified concept can be referred to with different linguistic signifiers, as when we look at how different languages refer to the same thing. Saussure emphasizes what he calls the arbitrary nature of the sign, which for him doesn't mean that any word can necessarily be used to refer to any concept, but any community can agree to use any signifier to refer to any signified. As an example to illustrate this arbitrary but communal nature of the sign, we can look at a series of signifiers that all refer to the same concept, noting when we are able to understand the signification. Those of us who primarily belong to the English speaking community of the United States maybe not be able to associate the concept with its signifier in Swahili or Japanese or Russian or even German, but are more familiar with the French and Spanish words for milk. But here we can also note that not only is the signifier communal and arbitrary, so is the signified. For instance, the Japanese word for cow's milk is produced, miraku, is a hybrid term adapted from English. There wasn't a great deal of cow's milk in the Asian diet until they began trading more with the West, and they have a separate word for mother's milk. Thus, Japanese wouldn't even have the signified, the concept associated with the signifier milk, without an outside culture introducing them to both the concept and the thing itself. This insight on linguistics and semiotics is often discussed in relation to snow. And by snow, I don't mean the Canadian rapper from the late 1990s, but the observation of Franz Boas that certain Arctic First Nations communities had both a broader number of signifiers or sound images associated with more differentiated understandings of snow. And while we're talking about language, it's important to note that the word Boaz uses to describe this Arctic First Nation community is now often received as a slur among those communities themselves, mostly because it was a term they were called by people who looked like the white Canadian rapper Snow. Informer, you know, say that I'm a snowmy, I go blam. I like keep on bam. So, to wrap up, one of the most fundamental aspects of the theory of semiotics and of the theories of cultural studies that are based upon it is that these meanings, these relations of signification, are always already the result of a particular social, political, and historical context. And by this, we don't just mean the syntagmatic context of a particular sentence, but the paradigmatic context of the broader community and society that would utter and understand that sentence. A context might prevent us from having the proper word or concept for something, and changing that context changes the meaning. I often illustrate this with a particular snow related concept from the context of Chicago, a context in which various objects are transformed into something else. So here we can see a milk crate and an ottoman, and here a 2x4 and a step stool, here a pine tree and a trash can, what looks like a very comfy, if broken, bar stool, and a wooden chair and a produce box. And while each of these signifiers are completely different, in the context of a Chicago winter storm, they all signify the same thing, a concept known as dibs. Each of these images was captured during the February 2011 snowpocalypse, when about 3 feet of snow was dumped on the city overnight. This was my first serious winter in Chicago, which I spent in Logan Square, and I learned a lot about the cultural context of Chicago. But I learned my lesson about dibs the hard way, joining with everyone living in neighborhoods that were primarily served by street parking who had to dig their cars out of the drifts. And then it felt only right that they should be able to save the spot they had cleared. There's a lot to unpack here about the way our Lockean culture attributes private ownership to those who improve something with their labor, but in the meantime, the point to take away is that within a particular community, these signifiers are generally accepted to mean that you should consider that spot reserved by your neighbor, and vice versa. For those outside the context of this sign community, it just looks like junk in the street. This can have to do with the spatial boundaries of a community or the passage of time in that community. So this 1950s 7 Up ad where a baby is drinking soda doesn't read in the same way now that dentists have identified the problem of Mountain Dew mouth. So we can offer 4 theses to sum up these ideas of semiotics. First, all meaning is arbitrary, both the word and the choice of which things to name. All meaning is contextual, it's not natural. And all meaning is a product of specific historical, political circumstances and struggles. And finally, all meaning can be changed. And by this, we mean the relationship between the signifiers and signifieds is open to change. Saussure is often discussed in relation to another linguist working at roughly the same time, Charles Sanders Peirce. Peirce has a very complex system of theoretical concepts, as you can see here on the right hand of your screen. These concepts are, are concerned with the relationship of the sign to the referent, the thing in the real world to which the sign refers. This is different than Saussure, who is concerned more with the way that mental concepts are transferred from one speaker to another. As I say, there's quite a few of these concepts. We're only going to look at 3 types of these signs. The indexical sign is made by or in the presence of its referent. So a frequent example here is a footprint in the sand. If you look at the footprint as a sign, it is a sign that the foot was in the same space as the sand, as the sign that was created. An iconic sign, in contrast, is a sign that visually represents its referent. So a picture of a footprint Doesn't mean that the footprint was ever in the same space as that sign, but it visually represents it. It looks like it's like a foot. And finally, a symbolic sign is a symbol that signifies but doesn't visually represent the referent. So the word footprint is a symbolic sign. So if we were to take another example, we could see that the purpose of this photo is to prove that the thing it documents existed in the real world. The photographic sign is presumed to have been made in the presence of the thing. It is an indexical sign. In contrast, this picture of a pig is an iconic sign that visually depicts its referent. It looks like a pig. And the word pig is a symbolic sign that signifies but does not visually represent its referent. The main purpose of this set of distinctions is frequently to note the way that, despite years of the ability to manipulate them, photographs are frequently seen as indexical. We can note this when we see celebrity endorsements like these, where long dead movie stars are purported to use the products that didn't exist in their lifetimes. But perhaps the most important examples of this dynamic are when the images we imagine are indexical are altered in some fashion. An important example of this was when two magazines featured what were supposedly the same mugshot of O.J. Simpson on their covers at the same time. The mugshot is premised upon the sign's indexical relationship with its referent. The photo is supposed to represent the reality of the subject, the way this person looked at the moment of their arrest. When Time magazine darkened the image and added effects to make it seem more foreboding, it was making an editorial decision that appeared to make an argument about O.J. Simpson's guilt. The indexical truth has long been challenged by the availability of Photoshop and other editing software, but the widespread use of AI image generation is upsetting this assumption in fundamental ways. Here, not only is there no such thing as shrimp Jesus, but even this physical object has never existed in the real world, as it appears to in this photo. What was important about celebrity endorsements has been undermined by the possibility of AI deepfakes, a reality we can see represented in NBC's labeling of this screenshot of this video of Donald Trump licking Elon Musk's toes. And if you couldn't tell that it was fake by the fact that he has two left feet, then NBC has added this note that says it's a fake image. So with these concepts in place, we can look again at this meme. There's a lot going on in this meme that semiotics can help us unpack, not least of which is the fact that that it is presented as a hyperrealistic indexical sign by using what appears to be an indexical photo of the Chicago skyline at sunset to represent the city. Helicopters and napalm explosions, and the stance, if not the costuming, resembling those from the scene in Apocalypse Now. This AI image generation doesn't only suggest a reference to the film, but a promise that these events will really occur. We must have the context of the film and especially this scene and character for the full meaning of the meme to work, but together they articulate a promise to bring war to an American city. And this promise, in turn, relies upon the broader context of the US in the summer and fall of 2025, where aggressive immigration enforcement in Los Angeles led to protests and resistance, which led to the National Guard deployment in the city and further protests. And shortly after, the National Guard were deployed in Washington, D.C., ostensibly in response to a crime wave. Chicago was slated to be the next city Trump would send troops into. And this context is necessary for the signification of the meme that Trump shared to make sense. It is still an arbitrary and some might say capricious image, like all forms of signification, but it is one element in a longer struggle not only over the meaning of these images, but, as I'll explore next time, over the legitimate exercise of power in a society. Next time, I'll use the ideas of denotation, connotation, and myth to unpack this and other images further, and more importantly, to talk about the way that words and signs become the grounds on which these struggles for meaning take place. Till next time, take care.